We need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And today's consumer holds us accountable. So I think, had we potentially put this film out as the first thing that we have done, we might have gotten a different response, but we had done the work behind the scenes to be able to tell this story.
And that's literally worked for years, and this is not something they shout from the rooftops. Gathering the voices who are, thinking about equity and inclusion every day, that are on the front lines of different causes, activists and so forth, and asking them, how can we improve? What parts of our operation are inclusive?
Welcome to Behind the Numbers Brand Anatomy, an all-new eMarketer podcast that looks under the hood of your favorite brands, made possible by Smartlyio. It's January 26th, and I'm your host, eMarketer Briefing Director Jeremy Goldman, and this is the show that gets inside brands and dives deep into one of their recent campaigns or discusses the ROI behind a new technology they've adopted. Today, we're talking with Abigail Jacobs, SVP of Integrated Marketing at Sephora, and Joshua DuBois, co-founder and CEO of cultural insights firm Gauge. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I'm excited for this, but here's what we have on deck for you today. First, a speed intro where we get to know our guests in 100 seconds or less. Then, tell me what you really think, where yours truly and this week's guests discuss a few stories and themes in the news that will be highly relevant to marketers. And then we'll jump into this week's case study, how Sephora wins by committing to DEI initiatives. All right, Abigail, Joshua, time for your speed intros where we get to know you and see how you think on your feet. Let's have Abigail maybe go first, shall we? A few questions for you, and then Joshua will get to you right afterwards. 100 seconds on the clock. Our producer, Victoria, will be timing you. Your time starts now. All right, Abigail, what's your core mission at Sephora?
We work to inspire fearlessness in everyone. And for us, it's about making sure that we have the most welcoming community in beauty.
What do you think personally is your strangest quirk?
Oh man, that's a good question. I mean, I guess it's not that strange, but I talk out loud to my dog constantly, full conversations.
Well, that answers our fourth question. Do you have any actual pets? So I'll skip that one. What's your biggest pet peeve?
Oh man, I think people taking credit for other people's work.
And what is one technology you're watching in 2022?
The metaverse.
All right, love it. Joshua, tag team, you're up. You're stuck on a desert island. What two non-essentials do you bring with you?
A Keurig and K-Cups.
Oh, nice. Hope that's a lot of K-Cups. Social media platform you spend the most time on?
Now Instagram.
What's something that you've learned in the past year?
I've learned the process of scaling.
And what is your favorite pet, since Abigail preempted me there?
So my favorite pet is sort of, at the moment, any pet that is not my very loud Yorkie who tends to interrupt every Zoom that I'm on. And so any other pet other than Cinco right now would be my favorite.
Nice. Okay, perfect. We got through just in time.
We won't tell Cinco you said that, Joshua.
Yeah, let's keep that between us. The door is currently blocked, so he can't make it in.
We probably jinxed ourselves, but let's see. Now it's time for Tell Me What You Really Think. This is a new segment where I pick one or two stories in the news that will be highly relevant to brand marketers, and we get our guests' perspectives. So I just want to throw a few things that we are looking at very closely in the eMarketer briefing team. One thing that I thought was really interesting is that Starbucks has committed to a more diverse supply chain. They're increasing their annual spend with diverse suppliers to $1.5 billion by 2030. At least that's planned. And that's almost double the roughly $800 million the company spent with diverse suppliers in fiscal year 2021, according to Restaurant Dive. And I thought that was a really interesting story. Is this impactful? Does this matter? And if so, why? What do you think? Maybe, Joshua, if you want to start with this one.
Yeah, I think it's hugely impactful, and I think it hopefully will set a trend, and I think it'll ripple across the economy, particularly in marginalized communities. So the top line is that it's phenomenal. I think one key thing to look at is if they're able to really drive change among small and medium-sized enterprises. It's much more straightforward to look at larger suppliers and folks who are frequently in the conversation and already already at the table. It's much more difficult to identify those small businesses that can support Starbucks in different ways around the country, bringing new businesses to the table, accelerating, entrepreneurs and so forth as a part of that overall spend. And so that's really where the game change happens if they're able to drive all the way down to small and medium-sized enterprises as well.
Abigail, any thoughts?
I mean, I totally agree with Joshua. I think it's exceptional what Starbucks is doing, but I think it also brings to light that a lot of the change that needs to happen is behind the scenes and early in the process. I think we really thought about this when we took the 15% pledge to add new Black-owned brands to our shelves. We had to think about the full supply chain and how we're supporting those brands from inception to launch. And that's what Starbucks is saying here, that it's not just about what the client's seeing or, numbers donated. It's about actually how DE&I initiatives are throughout our entire process and our entire supply chain.
It is interesting, right? Because of course there's so much effort, and I know we're going to get to this during the case study about kind of the external, like you said,
right.
The things that people are seeing, but there are all these things that have these downstream effects. And I'm wondering, do you guys see that the average consumer are holding brands accountable for what's happening behind the scenes? Is there kind of more transparency that's being demanded by the average consumer?
I think what the average consumer is holding us accountable to is actually sustainability and not just, a flash in the pan. But if you're launching, in our case, more Black-owned brands, what are you doing to make those brands successful long-term? So while they may, the average consumer may not understand the nuances that come into building a brand, investing in a brand, making sure that it is successful long-term, they are holding us accountable to, not just having those brands in our stores for a month, but starting them on a small shelf and seeing them a year from now on a, what we call a larger gondola. That's what they're holding us accountable for.
Yeah. So one, just completely agree there. And, the other thing I would add is that the average consumer, I think, is looking at these things, but it's also the intermediaries that are increasingly communicating to the average consumer about what brands are doing, right? So civic and civil rights organizations that are tracking these things for the first time, influencers who are holding brands accountable. One of the amazing things that Sephora has done over the years is actually bring leading community voices to the table and being very transparent and open. They have a wonderful program called Equity Advisors and Equity Partners, where the people who are speaking to the average consumer are at the table sharing thoughts and ideas with the Sephora team, and they're able to pass along updates. Many of them are good. Some, are interim reports and progress and challenges and so forth. And so I think increasingly we have a tier of communicators that are both holding brands accountable, but also speaking to consumers on the ground.
I think Joshua makes a really good point because consumers are looking towards those influencers and those communicators and saying, hey, should I trust this?
Yeah.
And those folks are the ones who, are a little bit more behind the scenes and can say, yeah, this is legit. You should trust what this brand is doing.
Another story that I saw that was really interesting came from Marvin Chow. He's a VP of Global Marketing at Google. And he had a CNBC story where he was actually talking about how important it is for marketing leaders to acknowledge their blind spots. Was also another key thing that I thought was really interesting about this is how he actually, stepped up to champion Google's Stop Asian Hate commitments. And he felt that there was kind of this opportunity to actually show a little bit more, bring his whole self to work, so to speak. And I'm wondering, that's a really interesting trend, people feeling that they have causes that are really impactful to them that they're going to bring into the office. And, how important is that as a trend to be watching, and maybe actually, Abigail, to start out with you, I'm wondering, what does Sephora do to try to make sure that people feel heard and are able to bring their full self and these issues that they care about to the forefront?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that we're doing is focusing on hiring and diversity around the table, right? So that we are, in every decision that we made, we have diverse perspective, diverse lived experiences that are weighing in on on what we're doing. We also have ERGs, so employee resource groups, that we activate in numerous ways. So I know we're going to talk about our Black Beauty is Beauty campaign, but we have a group called Sephora Noir, which is Black leaders within Sephora that we engage with when we're talking about issues or messaging that is designed for the Black and African American community or speaks to issues that are relevant to this community. But the other part of it that I'll say is, employees want to feel connected to their jobs now in a way that's totally different than years before. And so when we're able to say, bring your full self to the work and think about how you personally connect to it, when I think about equity and inclusion, I come to it as a woman and think about it from that filter. And when I'm able to connect to my job, I spend a lot of time at work. It just makes me feel like what I'm doing is important and that I'm making a difference. And that is something that employees are looking for, significantly right now and demanding from their employers. They're demanding that their voices be heard, that their unique perspectives be valued, and that they be welcomed in conversations and in decision-making.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And the cool thing is that when employees feel like they are seen, when they feel like they're thriving, they're also just more productive and they're happier and they're getting more done. And they're telling the good news about a brand, not just in formal spaces, but in informal spaces. And, you're building more, validators, even from amongst your own employee base, by creating spaces for people to just be who they are. So just that, I think it just works all around. The other big takeaway I took from the article, and thank you all for sharing it with us, is that it just seemed like the theme was, no more just announcements. Talking is not enough. You actually have to do stuff, right? And that's I think that's a place where Sephora has really, really been strong, especially, thinking about what their unique value add is in a particular space. Sephora is not a criminal justice reform organization or, any other of the parts of the racial equity conversation that they could play in. But what they can do is think about beauty standards and think about how to change beauty standards. And so that's where I think the Black Beauty is Beauty campaign is such an important part of the overall equity conversation.
Oh my God, you guys are ahead of me. I want to get to that. Yeah, no, in all seriousness, that is a campaign that I'm very excited to ask you guys about. And I will say, building on your comments, I mean, one takeaway for me from the article was this actually really interesting research from Wunderman Thompson last year that I've worked on in the past. And, just basically that 85% of Gen Zers think that brands need to be about something more than profit. And 80% believe brands should help make people's lives better. So yeah, ultimately, this is something that the consumers bought into and the employees bought into.
I mean, when you're spending money with a brand, you want to spend your money with something that you believe in.
And I think that's increasing, like with every successive generation. Like our niece is a freshman in college now. And I mean, she literally is rigorous about every single purchasing decision. It's not an impulse buy online or in the grocery store. She's running all of her decisions through a filter of, is this going to make the world a better place? Is it neutral? Or is this going to set, humanity back? Which is, even for someone like me, that's a new set of filters that the next generation, I think, is bringing to the table.
That makes me so excited.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I was also going to say, and I know we have to go to a break, but I was going to say, I think you look too good for having a niece in college. It's probably because you go to Sephora often. So
I appreciate that. And yes, I am an avid Sephora shopper, led by my wife and business partner, Michelle DuBois, who is the Sephora lead in the household, but I am there as well. So, yeah.
All right, we're going to take a quick word from our sponsor, Smartly.io, and we'll be right back.
Hi to all the social media marketers out there. Listen up. Social platforms have become more important than ever for brands. You know this. So if you're looking to scale your social advertising in 2022, look no further. Smartly.io is #1 in social media advertising. They help brands automate every step of the process by combining creative production and ad buying to unlock greater performance. To get the brand new 2022 social advertising trends report, go to smartly.io/eMarketer.
All right, now it's time for our brief case study, where we look at a recent brand campaign or deployment and discuss what went right and some learnings for next time. All right, so Abigail, I was curious, what was the genesis of the Black Beauty is Beauty campaign? And how did you determine at the outset how you would, just determine if the campaign was successful or not?
So there were a few insights that went into this campaign, and there were a few parts to this campaign. The first insight was that following the death of George Floyd, there was a massive increase and attention around Black-owned brands, Black-owned businesses, Black-owned creators, commitments to sharing more faces of color in advertising. That actually spiked and went back down to where it was previously. And the insight there for us was, how do we actually keep this attention growing and keep the importance on these businesses, these brands, these founders, these creators, so that this is not, as I mentioned before, this is not a flash in the pan. The other insight was we were the first major retailer to sign the 15% pledge, which is a commitment to increasing the number of Black-owned brands that we have on our shelves. And so we wanted to showcase that assortment that we had built up and talk about it through the lens of Sephora, which is not just that these are Black-owned brands, but these are brands that have been vetted and chosen by the folks that choose every single brand that is on our Sephora shelves. These are incredible brands and incredible products. So there were a few parts to this campaign. The first was a film called Black Beauty is Beauty, which was intended to pay homage and celebrate the contributions that Black culture, innovators, creators had given to the Black community over history that some may not recognize are part of their everyday. So it started with the line, "What is beauty without Black beauty?" And it really just wanted to remind us all of the space that we were playing in on a daily basis and what we owed to Black culture.
And then what are all the other ways, I guess, that you brought that campaign to life? Because obviously you've got the film, and I imagine there was probably a matter of determining, which channels you would flesh that out and bring that to people.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So that was a film that was on TV and across digital channels, but we followed it quickly with a 360 campaign around those Black-owned brands. So that was at the front of our stores, through paid outlets as well, on our own channels, through social. We worked with Joshua and team to make sure we were getting these messages out to influencers, as we spoke of, the voices that the communities that we're trying to reach are really listening to and valuing right now. And so that was a big showcase of the products and the brands that our clients could celebrate and purchase. We also did what we called a Google hack, which is, when we looked at the space in which we felt Black beauty should play. So if you think about other cultures that have given to the beauty industry, you may recognize K beauty, Korean beauty, or J beauty, Japanese beauty. We felt like Black beauty should be elevated in the same way that those cultures are. And if you searched for Black beauty on Google, it wasn't. And so what we did was a bit of a Google hack using the hashtag Black beauty to try and elevate incredible creators, looks, makeup trends among Black culture and the Black community to elevate and celebrate.
That's pretty cool. I mean, Joshua, obviously you're here for a reason. I mean, what role did NXTLab, by Gage, play in powering the campaign?
Well, I should say at the outset, this was Sephora's phenomenal idea and some amazing execution from them and their agency. And our role was to bring thought leaders, cultural leaders, folks who are voices in the Black community and think about these issues all the time, to the table to shape and react to and help Sephora develop the campaign early in the process and then throughout. Actually have a software tool where brand leaders can log on and connect to a community of now over 13,000. We call them Gagers. These are online and offline leaders, civic leaders, influential voices from diverse backgrounds, and under NDA, with some level of confidentiality, share their stuff and get reactions. Does this make sense? Are we missing anything here? How could we be more inclusive? Where do you think the opportunities are here? And so Sephora used this tool to share the Black Beauty is Beauty concept early on, and then the execution with a phenomenal community of diverse leaders, and got some really good feedback from that that helped them shape the campaign. So that's the role that we played.
And we made changes based on that feedback. I mean, it was incredibly, we got both high level and then very nuanced feedback on individual scenes in the spot that was so helpful for us to get this right.
Yeah. And that was one of the cool things to see. One, overall, there's a tremendous enthusiasm for the idea and much of the execution, but there were some nuanced pieces. I remember a couple folks responded, I love the diversity in the scenes overall, but is there age diversity? Is there size diversity and so forth? And they were able to take that back, both Sephora and their agency partners, and think about how to make changes that better reflected, the diverse spectrum of African American experience.
I remember when this campaign debuted, and I thought, this is great in the sense that I've worked with Sephora for years when I was a marketer in beauty. And, I know enough about Sephora to know that this is intrinsic to Sephora's values. And I was wondering, Abigail, how important is it for anybody when developing a campaign like Black Beauty is Beauty that it's connected in some fashion to the brand's principles? Because if not, it just feels a little mercenary, I'm imagining.
So important. I mean, and it's based on what we were talking about before. We need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And today's consumer holds us accountable. So I feel so lucky to work for a brand that could put a film out like that and have our community say, yeah, that sounds like something Sephora has the right to talk about, or that sounds authentic to who Sephora is. I think for us, what was so important was, we were backing this up with actions as well. In early last year, we introduced a study on bias in the retail environment that we worked on with Joshua and team, as well as with, academics and research. We did, both qualitative and quantitative research about, what are the truths about the retail experience for people of color, and what is an action plan that we can devise coming out of that. So I think, had we potentially put this film out as the first thing that we have done, we might have gotten a different response, but we had done the work behind the scenes to be able to tell this story.
And that's literally worked for years, and this is not something they shout from the rooftops, but I alluded to it before, gathering the voices who are, thinking about equity and inclusion every day, that are on the front lines of different causes, activists and so forth, and asking them, how can we improve, what parts of our operation are inclusive and representative of communities, and where can we grow? And really building those relationships over time, including through the retail anti-bias study. And then this film sort of comes on the heels of that. And so that pre-work is absolutely essential. And that's something that I think a place where Sephora really shine.
So speaking of shining, I kind of feel like this podcast episode will especially shine if we can get some exclusive, great data out of Sephora in terms of what went right, maybe what went wrong, what you can do better for next time. But by all means, feel free to break news with us in terms of, some success metrics that came out of this campaign. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I mean, I think what went right, we need to credit Joshua, the Gauge, and the NXTLab team on, because we got the nuances, the cultural nuances right. And we heard that. We heard from the Black community that, oh my gosh, this reflects me. This reflects my voice. I can't believe a brand is speaking to me in this way. So, I mean, that was just incredible. I think we look at response in social media, and this spot got, like, on our own social channels, it was like 96.8% positive, which is, we don't get that on an Instagram post about lipstick. So that was incredible to see. And I think the most important thing is long-term growth in sales for our Black-owned brands. So we have made significant impact in double-digit growth in sales for our Black-owned brands year over year. And that's incredibly exciting to see.
No, I think that's fantastic. At the same time, I'm sure, I know when I was a brand marketer, you're always like, what can I do better? What's something that we could optimize a little bit next time? Is there anything that you can think of for this particular campaign? Great
question. I mean, for me, it almost feels like this could have been a series. We could have done multiple films about Black culture. The film is actually a series of vignettes. There's a scene in a hair salon. There's a scene that's intended to be in the dorm room of an HBCU. Like, those could each be stories about, with cultural nuances. I think actually one of the articles that you asked us to respond to was talking about how personal and individual this journey is, and how stories of one often resonate more than stories of many. And so I do think that each of those individual stories could have grown into something bigger.
I just realized, maybe stepping back a second, Joshua, in a nutshell, and I'm sure you could go on for a while about this, but in a nutshell, what inspired you to launch Gauge and as a result go on to develop the platform NXTLab?
Yeah, it was really through our separate consulting work. We worked with some and continue to work with some amazing partners, but we realized that there was a gap in terms of how they were engaging culture and cultural leaders. They had a great ability to tap into the sentiment of the average consumer, but no ability, particularly at scale, to talk to folks who are leading the conversation in key communities, online influencers, offline leaders, folks who knew specific communities really, really well. And as a result, some of our, the folks we were working with and others out in the world were either making big public mistakes, and we've seen plenty of those, or more importantly, missing out on opportunities to go deep with diverse communities. And we also saw this interesting phenomenon where diverse leaders were valued for their platforms, but not for their wisdom, right? There's this basic notion that there's so much brilliance out there in diverse communities, but there was no tool that allowed brand leaders to tap into that brilliance at scale. And so we wanted to build that. So we spent a number of years building the software, convening this community of amazing folks, and then eventually connecting brand leaders with these diverse leaders to respond to ideas, questions, content, and hopefully build relationships over time. So that's what inspired it, is tapping into the wisdom of diverse leaders around the country.
I feel like this is also a great time to be in the space that you're in, not to be cynical, but wearing my marketer's hat, it does seem that just more and more people realize that it's good business in order to understand different cultural cohorts and serve them better.
That's exactly right. I mean, this is not just the right thing to do, the inclusive thing to do, but probably one of the most important growth strategies is thinking about that next generation, thinking about folks like my niece and others who are making decisions regarding what they're purchasing based on their values. And so, yes, this is right in the stream of direction that I think brands are heading in. So we're so pleased to have developed a tool that's sort of hitting at the right moment.
I think what Joshua said is really important, that there were probably brands that previously called him in a time of risk. And I think what's so exciting is the work that he and his team do is identify opportunity. And I think the brands that can look at this work in that way will win.
Actually building on that point, Abigail, I know that Sephora took the 15% pledge to dedicate at least 15% of its shelf space to Black-owned companies in, I think it was June 2020. And at that point, you'd carried 8 Black-owned brands. And by the fall of 2021, you more than doubled your assortment and achieved that 15% benchmark in the hair care category. Where are you now in that regard? And how important is that type of accountability, such as folks like me asking you questions? And also, I love that you just post this stuff on your website. But, how important is accountability to making sure that any brand, including yours, keeps on getting better in this regard?
So first of all, I'm super excited to share that we now have 21 Black-owned brands on our shelves. Accountability is everything. I mean, there was a little bit of a pledge-a-loser that happened at one point where, every company was signing up for, whether it was a pledge about diversity in their workforce or pledge about, accountability or transparency. And I think customers are saying, okay, how's that pledge going? And, it is important that we continue to report not just on our successes, but on our hiccups if we have them, so that we can show customers that this isn't a straight path to success. And it's part of the reason why we did not put a date in stone that we would reach 15% across all of our categories, because we knew that we needed to do the homework from the ground up. So one of the ways that we've done this is we have actually had an incubator program for a number of years that was focused on female-owned brands. And we shifted that focus to focus on brands founded by people of color. And so that way we are actually, it's just one of the ways that we are creating a pipeline to this pledge. Those brands go through a program that helps them with, finances, marketing, social media, influencers, VC funding, all of that. So those are the things that you need to put in place for success long-term. And we try to share all of that with clients so that they understand. We could have pretty easily gone out a few days after we made this pledge and been like, all right, we got 15%, but that's not the way that we're looking at this. We're looking at this as a sustainable program that will build over time.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I know we're reaching the end now, so I need to ask one maybe totally off-topic question, at least to Joshua.
Yeah.
I feel like I'd be remiss in not asking you this, but as someone who knows a former president. What's one thing about Barack Obama that most people wouldn't guess?
I hope I don't get in trouble by saying this, but
he's actually a longtime listener, so you might get in trouble.
That's perfect. I will never play basketball with him again, and I'll tell you why. He, I don't want to say is a hack on the basketball court, but he throws a mean elbow. And the problem with him throwing an elbow is that there are lots of men with like M16s surrounding the court, so you can't at all push back in any way. And so I've had a few experiences of playing basketball with him, and it's not the most, and he talks a lot of trash. And so it's not the most pleasant thing. And I love Barack Obama. He's a dear friend and mentor and one of the kindest and, smartest people that I know, but on the basketball court, he's a different man. And I just won't do that again to myself. So little insider intelligence there about our former president.
You heard it here first. Only play hockey with former President Obama. But, and then something that we ask everybody at the end on a personal level, not as a brand representative or anything else, for our parting shot. What are two brands you particularly admire that you draw inspiration from? Maybe Joshua, we'll start with you.
Well, certainly Sephora for walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And I'm not just saying that because Abigail's there, but I've seen them do it for years. But I had to think of a couple others, including folks that we've seen firsthand. Love how CVS Health has responded in this pandemic moment and really stepped up to the plate, not trying to get a lot of credit for the work that they're doing, providing vaccinations and so forth, moving into mental health spaces and more, but just doing the work. And so I appreciate them. I think Snap is doing some great work in these spaces. They've announced we've been able to work with them on developing an inclusive camera, the lens that really literally captures more diverse faces in a better way, because they realized that the initial development of the camera lens was built around white faces. And so they're rethinking that in some significant ways. And so those two come to mind. We really appreciate the work that both of them are doing.
You probably get this answer a lot, but Patagonia is a brand that I admire tremendously. I'm an avid outdoors person, and I just think what they do, I think their product is exceptional, but I think this is a brand that eats, sleeps, and breathes its values and has no question when taking action based on how deep those values go. The other brand that I was going to say that's kind of on my radar right now is Pinterest. When I think about social platforms, I think they're doing some really interesting stuff around equity and inclusion. And similar to what Joshua was speaking about with Snap, making sure that, the tools that they've built on the back end are free of bias, and the algorithmic tools are free of bias. And so I think that's a really interesting platform to be looking at in the future.
And I would be remiss to say I wouldn't want our friends at Pinterest to hear this without me saying that they are a proud Gauge subscriber, and we work with them on their inclusive hair type search tool.
Which is super interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. That's, and they, I mean,
Joshua didn't pay me to say that, by the way. I actually didn't even know that they were a client. So.
And again, that's mostly them, but we were able to bring a community around their development team to help shape that tool.
No, that's really fantastic. Great recommendations for us to book for next time. But that is all the time that we have for today's episode. Thank you so much, Joshua and Abigail. This was really fantastic.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you at podcast@eMarketer.com. I'll be back in 2 weeks for another episode of the Behind the Numbers Brand Anatomy. Make sure to tune in tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Smartlyio.